Denial's Shadow. Cassandra Pierce adjusted her glasses and smoothed down her charcoal pencil skirt before knocking on the imposing mahogany door. The nameplate gleamed, Jonathan Blackwood, Chief Executive Officer. Her hands trembled slightly, though not from the usual pre-meeting jitters that came with working for one of Boston's most formidable business titans. Today's tremors stemmed from the news she carried, news that would forever alter the careful professional boundaries they had crossed just once, 3 months ago, during a company retreat in the Berkshires. "Enter," called the deep voice she had come to know so well during her 2 years as his executive assistant. Jonathan barely glanced up from his laptop as she entered, his attention fixed on quarterly projections that dominated his dual monitors. At 45, he cut an impressive figure. Salt and pepper hair meticulously styled, his tailored navy suit a perfect complement to piercing blue eyes that could disarm board members and competitors alike. "The Henderson contract needs your signature before 5, and I've rescheduled your dinner with the Japanese investors to Thursday," Cassandra said, placing a folder on his desk. Her voice remained steady despite the thundering of her heart. Jonathan nodded absently, reaching for his Mont Blanc pen. "Anything else?" Cassandra inhaled deeply. "Yes, actually. I need to speak with you about something personal." Something in her tone finally captured his full attention. He leaned back in his leather chair, eyebrows raised. "Personal? That's unusual for you, Cassandra." "I'm pregnant," she said simply, the words hanging in the air between them. His expression shifted from surprise to calculation in seconds. "I see, and you're telling me because it's yours," she replied, maintaining eye contact despite her instinct to look away. "From the night in the Berkshires." Jonathan's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "That's impossible. We used protection." "It failed," Cassandra said. "I haven't been with anyone else in over a year." His face hardened as he stood, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Boston skyline. "Do you have any idea what you're implying?" "I built Blackwood Enterprises from nothing. I have a reputation, shareholders, responsibilities." He turned, eyes cold. "What exactly do you want from me, Cassandra?" "Money?" The accusation stung worse than any slap. "I want nothing from you except acknowledgement." "I thought you deserved to know." "Know what? That you're trying to trap a wealthy man with a pregnancy claim? It's not exactly an original strategy." His voice dropped dangerously. "Let me be perfectly clear, that child is not mine. I suggest you look elsewhere for paternal candidates or solutions to your situation." Cassandra felt her cheeks flush with humiliation and anger. "I'm not asking for your money or even your involvement. I simply thought you had the right to know about your child." "Not mine?" Each word was a glacial shard. "And if you pursue this fantasy, you'll find yourself not only unemployed but unemployable in this industry." "Do I make myself clear?" The threat hung between them like a physical barrier. Cassandra straightened her spine, surprising herself with the calm that settled over her. "Perfectly clear, Mr. Blackwood. I'll have my resignation letter on your desk by the end of the day." Something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps, but it vanished quickly. "That won't be necessary. Take the afternoon to reconsider your claims. We can forget this conversation happened." "No," Cassandra said quietly. "We can't, and I won't." She turned and walked out, closing the door gently behind her despite the desire to slam it. At her desk, she began methodically packing her personal items into a cardboard box, her mind racing with uncertainties, but her resolve unshaken. By evening, Cassandra had cleared her desk, submitted her resignation, and walked out of Blackwood Tower for the last time. As she stood on the sidewalk, one hand resting protectively over her still flat abdomen, she gazed up at the illuminated penthouse office, where Jonathan would be working late as usual. "It's just you and me now, little one," she whispered. "But we'll be okay." She didn't yet know that her journey as a single mother would hold more surprises than she could possibly imagine, or that fate would eventually bring Jonathan Blackwood back into her life in ways neither of them could foresee. Seeds of strength. 8 months after her resignation, Cassandra cradled her newborn daughter in the modest one-bedroom apartment she now called home. Olivia Grace Pierce arrived after 18 hours of labor. weighing 7 pounds and possessing a shock of dark hair that mirrored her father's. The resemblance was startling, from the distinctive arch of her eyebrows to the cleft in her tiny chin. It was as though nature itself was testifying to a truth Jonathan had so vehemently denied. "You're perfect," Cassandra whispered, tracing her finger along Olivia's cheek as the baby slept. Her mother, Eleanor, watched from the doorway with a mixture of pride and concern. "You should let me help you more," Eleanor said, bringing a cup of tea to the bedside table. "A baby is hard enough with 2 parents," Cassandra smiled wearily. "We'll manage. The freelance technical writing is bringing in steady work, and I can do it from home while she sleeps." What she didn't tell her mother was about the decision she'd made 2 weeks after leaving Blackwood Enterprises, a decision that seemed like insurance against an uncertain future. During her time with Jonathan, they had discussed his desire for children someday, leading to a surprising proposition. He had suggested they create embryos together, citing his age and desire to secure his legacy. It had been premature and presumptuous, but somehow Cassandra had agreed, seeing it as a sign of commitment. Several viable embryos had been frozen, with paperwork granting Cassandra full rights if Jonathan didn't claim them within 5 years. Now, as she held Olivia, Cassandra wondered about those embryos, tangible possibilities suspended in time, waiting for decisions she wasn't ready to make. Life settled into a challenging but rewarding rhythm. Cassandra built her freelance business while raising Olivia, who grew into a curious, bright-eyed toddler with her mother's gentleness and an uncanny, analytical mind that reminded Cassandra of Jonathan. On Olivia's 3rd birthday, after much soul-searching, Cassandra made a decision that would change their lives forever. Using her modest savings and the embryos legally hers, she underwent the procedure. Against all statistical probabilities, she became pregnant with twins. 7 months later, Thomas and Sophie Pierce entered the world, 15 minutes apart. Thomas inherited Jonathan's piercing blue eyes and strong jawline, while Sophie possessed his intellectual intensity, evident even as an infant. 3 under 4, her friend Diane marveled during a rare lunch out. "I don't know how you do it." Cassandra laughed, bouncing Sophie on her knee while Thomas slept in his carrier and Olivia colored quietly beside them. "One day at a time, and lots of coffee." What she didn't say was that each child's face held echoes of the man who had denied them, each milestone a bittersweet reminder of what Jonathan was missing, and what they were missing without him. Yet there was freedom in their little family unit, untethered from the complications of a man whose wealth and influence were matched only by his emotional unavailability. As the children grew, Cassandra's business flourished. She specialized in technical documentation for medical devices, work that paid well and offered flexibility. By the twins' 4th birthday, she had purchased a small 3-bedroom house in a good school district outside Boston, with a yard where the children could play. Life wasn't perfect. There were nights when exhaustion drove her to tears, moments when explaining "where Daddy is" tied her stomach in knots, and times when the financial strain of raising 3 children alone seemed overwhelming. But there were also impromptu dance parties in the kitchen, bedtime stories with all 3 children piled onto her lap, and the fierce pride of watching them grow into kind, thoughtful individuals. "Mommy, why do I have blue eyes when you have brown?" Thomas asked one evening as Cassandra tucked him in. At 7, he was increasingly observant about genetics, a science prodigy already performing experiments in the garage. Cassandra hesitated only briefly. "You got those from your biological father." "Will we ever meet him?" Sophie asked from the doorway, never far from her twin. "Perhaps someday," Cassandra replied carefully. "That would be his choice." "I don't need to meet him," Olivia declared, appearing behind Sophie with the protective instinct of an 8-year-old who had appointed herself assistant mother. "We have everything we need already." Cassandra gathered all 3 into a hug, breathing in the scent of shampoo and childhood. "Yes, we do." But fate had other plans, ones that would soon collide with the carefully constructed world Cassandra had built. In just 2 weeks' time, a charity gala would bring her face to face with Jonathan Blackwood for the first time in 8 years, and nothing would prepare him for the sight of 3 children who carried his unmistakable genetic imprint. Chance Encounters, the Children's Hospital Benefit Gala, was the social event of the Boston spring season, drawing the city's elite to support pediatric medical research. Cassandra normally avoided such functions, but as the technical writer for the hospital's groundbreaking heart valve device, she'd been specifically requested to attend. The invitation had come with a generous honorarium she couldn't refuse, money that would help fund Olivia's science camp and the twins' music lessons. "You look beautiful." "Mom," Olivia said as Cassandra adjusted the simple emerald gown she'd splurged on for the occasion. At 8, Olivia was already showing signs of the woman she would become, observant, thoughtful, with a quiet strength that sometimes took Cassandra's breath away. "Thank you. Sweetheart, Mrs. Henderson will be here any minute to stay with you 3. "Can't we come?" Thomas asked, looking up from the complex circuit board he was assembling on the living room floor. "I want to see the hospital technologies." "Another time," Cassandra promised, kissing his forehead. "This is a grown-up party." Sophie looked up from her book, eyes serious behind her glasses. "Will there be dancing?" "Mom should dance," Cassandra laughed. "I doubt I'll be dancing, but thank you for the vote of confidence." Little did she know how the evening would unfold. The hospital atrium had been transformed into an elegant ballroom, with crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over the assembled guests. Cassandra kept to herself, making polite conversation when necessary, but primarily observing from the periphery. She was discussing the heart valve project with a young surgeon when a ripple of awareness passed through the crowd. Jonathan Blackwood had arrived. The years had been kind to him. Now, in his early 50s, he carried himself with the same commanding presence, though subtle lines around his eyes hinted at the passage of time. He moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries, flanked by a stunning blonde woman who looked barely 30. Cassandra's heart hammered painfully. She'd known he might attend. Blackwood Enterprises was a major hospital donor, but had hoped to avoid a direct encounter. She excused herself from the conversation and retreated toward the exhibition of medical innovations, where her work was displayed. Fate, however, had other plans. "This valve design is revolutionary," came his familiar deep voice from behind her. "The miniaturization allows for—" He stopped mid-sentence as Cassandra turned. Recognition dawned immediately, followed by something unreadable in his eyes. Cassandra. "Jonathan," she acknowledged with a slight nod, grateful for years of practice in maintaining composure during difficult client meetings. An awkward silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and memories neither wished to acknowledge publicly. "You look well," he finally said. "Thank you. As do you." She gestured to the display. "I wrote the technical documentation for this project." "Still precise with words, I see." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Your skills were always exceptional." Before she could respond, a commotion erupted near the entrance. Cassandra turned to see Mrs. Henderson looking flustered as she attempted to corral 3 well-dressed but clearly unauthorized children. "Mom!" Olivia called, spotting Cassandra across the room. "Thomas got sick, and Sophie wouldn't stay home without both of us, and I couldn't let Mrs. Henderson handle it alone." Cassandra hurried toward them, acutely aware of Jonathan following behind her. "I'm so sorry," Mrs. Henderson whispered. "Thomas was running a fever suddenly, and then everything snowballed." "It's all right," Cassandra assured her, pressing a hand to Thomas's forehead. "He's burning up. We should go home." "I wanted to see the medical innovations," Thomas said weakly, his blue eyes, Jonathan's eyes, glassy with fever. "Is everything all right?" Jonathan asked, coming to stand beside them. 3 pairs of eyes turned to study him with curiosity. Sophie's analytical gaze, Thomas's intelligent assessment, and Olivia's protective scrutiny, all bearing subtle but unmistakable echoes of the man himself. Jonathan froze, his expression shifting from polite concern to stunned recognition as he looked from one child to the next, noting familiar features in each small face. His gaze finally locked with Cassandra's, questions evident in the rigid set of his shoulders. "Children, this is Mr. Blackwood," Cassandra said evenly. He's the CEO of a company I used to work for. Mr. Blackwood, these are my children, Olivia, Thomas, and Sophie. Something flickered in Jonathan's eyes. Shock, disbelief, perhaps even fear. Pleased to meet you, Olivia said formally, extending her hand the way Cassandra had taught her. Mom says good manners matter more than good luck. Jonathan took her small hand automatically, his composure visibly shaken. Your mother is a wise woman. We should go, Cassandra said, gathering Thomas into her arms. He needs medicine and rest. Jonathan stepped forward. Let me help. My driver can take you home. That's not necessary. Please, he said, his voice dropping so only she could hear. We need to talk. Cassandra hesitated, then nodded. Some conversations were 8 years overdue. Part 4. Truth's reflection. In the week following the gala, Jonathan Blackwood found himself unable to focus on quarterly projections or acquisition deals. Instead, his mind continuously replayed the image of 3 children with achingly familiar features, children who challenged everything he'd convinced himself to believe 8 years ago. Have the DNA tests been processed? He asked his private investigator, Marcus, who sat across from his desk with a manila envelope. Yes, sir. Results came back this morning. Marcus slid the papers across the desk. 99.9998% probability of paternity for all 3 children. Jonathan stared at the report, though he hardly needed scientific confirmation. He'd known the moment he saw them, known in a way that transcended logic or denial. The twins were unmistakably his, with Thomas bearing his eyes and Sophie his intellect, evident even in their brief interaction. And Olivia, the oldest, she had his mother's chin and his father's analytical stare. How did she manage it? He murmured, more to himself than Marcus. The twins, I mean. The embryos created during your relationship, Marcus replied. According to the paperwork I found, you signed over all rights if you didn't claim them within 5 years. Jonathan remembered signing those papers, assuming they were a mere formality. He'd been so certain then about his future with Cassandra, before fear and self-preservation overrode what might have been love. She never asked for child support, Marcus continued. Never filed for paternity. She's built a respectable career as a technical writer, owns a modest home, and by all accounts is an exceptional mother. The unspoken judgment in Marcus's tone wasn't lost on Jonathan. As a father of 4 himself, Marcus clearly found Jonathan's past actions difficult to understand. That will be all, Jonathan said, dismissing him. Alone in his office, Jonathan stood at the window overlooking the city. For 8 years, he'd built Blackwood Enterprises into an international powerhouse, acquiring companies, amassing wealth, and dating a succession of beautiful, accomplished women who never threatened his emotional equilibrium. None had lasted more than a few months. His current companion, Victoria, was already showing signs of discontent with his emotional unavailability. He'd told himself it was the price of success, that family entanglements would only distract from his ambitions. Yet here he was at the pinnacle of achievement, suddenly hollow with the knowledge of what he'd sacrificed. 3 days later, Jonathan found himself parked outside a community center where, according to his investigator, Sophie and Thomas took music lessons every Thursday afternoon. He watched from his car as Cassandra ushered the twins inside, then continued sitting with Olivia in the front seat of her modest sedan, apparently helping with homework. Before he could reconsider, Jonathan approached her car and tapped lightly on the window. Cassandra's surprise quickly transformed into wariness as she rolled down the window. Jonathan, may I speak with you? With both of you? Olivia studied him with unnerving intensity. You're the man from the hospital party. Yes, Jonathan confirmed, meeting her gaze directly. I am. After a moment's hesitation, Cassandra nodded. 15 minutes. There's a coffee shop next door. Inside the cafe, Jonathan watched as Olivia carefully selected a hot chocolate and lemon scone, noting how Cassandra allowed her daughter to order independently, while remaining supportively present, a parenting balance he found himself admiring. I've confirmed what I already knew, he said quietly once they were seated. All 3 children are mine. I never doubted it, Cassandra replied, her voice steady. Though you certainly did. Olivia looked between them, understanding dawning in her expression. You're our biological father. Jonathan nodded, impressed by her directness. I am. Why didn't you want us? The question was asked without self-pity, merely curiosity. Cassandra interjected gently. Olivia, that's a complicated adult situation. No, Jonathan interrupted. She deserves honesty. He met Olivia's gaze. I was afraid. Not of you, I didn't know you then, but of failing at something that mattered. In business, I always knew what to do, how to succeed. But family, he shook his head. My own father was cold, distant. I feared I'd be the same. So instead of trying and maybe failing, you chose not to try at all, Olivia observed with devastating clarity. Jonathan felt the truth of her words like a physical blow. Yes, and it was the greatest mistake of my life. Bridges built. The seasons changed, marking the slow, deliberate pace of healing and reconnection. What began with awkward Saturday afternoon visits evolved into a new rhythm for both households. Jonathan initially approached his newfound fatherhood with the same methodical precision he applied to business acquisitions, researching child development, scheduling activities with military efficiency, and attempting to quantify progress through observable metrics. It was Olivia who first broke through his corporate approach. You don't have to try so hard, she told him one afternoon as he anxiously checked his watch during their outing to the Museum of Science. We're just kids, not a board meeting. The simple observation startled a genuine laugh from him, perhaps his first authentic emotional response since re-entering their lives. From that moment, Jonathan began the harder work of dismantling the walls he'd built around his heart, learning to be present rather than perfect. For Cassandra, the journey was equally challenging. Years of single parenthood had forged her into a fiercely independent woman, one who had carefully constructed a life where Jonathan's absence was an accepted reality rather than an open wound. His return disrupted that equilibrium, forcing her to navigate complex emotions while prioritizing her children's needs above her own lingering hurt. He's trying, her mother observed during a Sunday visit, watching through the kitchen window as Jonathan patiently helped Thomas construct a model rocket in the backyard. That counts for something. Trying now doesn't erase leaving then, Cassandra replied, though without the edge that would have colored such words months earlier. No, Eleanor agreed. But forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about creating space for a different future. That different future began taking shape in unexpected ways. When Sophie's school district cut funding for the advanced mathematics program, Jonathan didn't simply write a check, though he offered to. Instead, he helped organize a community fundraiser, leveraging his business connections while working alongside parents he would never have encountered in his previous life. For Thomas's science fair, he took a rare day off to help finish the solar energy display, arriving in jeans rather than his customary suit, hands stained with glue and marker as they worked past midnight to perfect the presentation. The project won first prize, but Jonathan treasured more the memory of his son falling asleep against his shoulder during the drive home. With Olivia, connection came through literature. Their shared love of classic novels led to a standing Sunday morning tradition of reading together at a neighborhood bookstore, discussing themes and characters with equal seriousness. It was during one such discussion about Great Expectations that Olivia first casually referred to him as Dad rather than Jonathan. Neither acknowledged the moment openly, but both left the bookstore that day with lighter hearts. Victoria exited Jonathan's life 3 months after the children entered it, unwilling to share his attention with a ready-made family. He barely noticed her departure, his emotional landscape now populated with people who challenged and changed him in ways romantic relationships never had. Cassandra watched these transformations with cautious optimism, maintaining careful boundaries even as co-parenting bridges were constructed between them. She declined his offer to move the family to a larger home, insisting on preserving the life she'd built independently. Yet she found herself increasingly comfortable with his presence. their former tension gradually replaced by mutual respect and tentative friendship. The true turning point came unexpectedly, nearly a year after their reunion. During a routine checkup, doctors discovered a heart murmur in Sophie that required surgical intervention, the very procedure using the valve technology Cassandra had documented. The night before surgery, Jonathan arrived at the hospital to find Cassandra alone in the cafeteria, finally allowing herself the tears she'd hidden from the children. Without words, he sat beside her, offering silent support until she spoke. "I keep thinking about all the nights I sat up with fevers, stomach flus, nightmares, handling everything alone because I had to. And now, facing the biggest medical crisis of their lives, suddenly I'm not alone." She looked at him, vulnerability and strength intertwined in her gaze. "It's both a relief and a reminder of what should have been." "I can't change what I did," Jonathan said quietly. "But I promise you won't face anything alone again. Not unless you choose to." The surgery was successful, with Sophie recovering with remarkable resilience. During her hospital stay, the family formed a continuous presence in her room, Cassandra coordinating care, Jonathan handling insurance paperwork and second opinions, Olivia reading stories, and Thomas creating elaborate get-well cards. One evening, as Sophie slept peacefully, a nurse paused in the doorway, smiling at the tableau of Jonathan and Cassandra reviewing discharge instructions together. "You have a beautiful family," she commented. "It's wonderful to see parents so unified during stressful times." Neither corrected her assumption. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn evening, Jonathan invited Cassandra to dinner, just the two of them, for the first time since their reconnection. They sat at a quiet table overlooking the harbor, the conversation flowing with unexpected ease. "I've been thinking about family structures," Jonathan said as they finished dessert, "about how they don't have to follow conventional patterns to work." Cassandra raised an eyebrow. "That's quite an evolution from the man who once saw family as a liability to his corporate aspirations." "I was wrong about many things," he acknowledged, "but especially about what constitutes success." He hesitated, then continued, "I'm not asking for forgiveness or romance or anything you're not ready to give. I'm simply saying that whatever shape our family takes, I'm committed to it, to all of you, for the rest of my life." Cassandra studied him, seeing not the polished executive who had once dismissed her, but a man humbled and transformed by love for the children he'd nearly lost. "We've built something that works," she said carefully. "Different from what I imagined, but perhaps better for having been tested by fire." As they walked along the harbor afterward, their hands brushed accidentally, then deliberately intertwined, a small bridge between past and future, between what was broken and what was being rebuilt. Neither rushed to define what might develop between them, content to let it unfold with the same patience that had allowed their unusual family to find its footing. Back home, they found all three children awake despite the late hour, eager to hear about the evening. Observing their parents' clasped hands, Olivia exchanged knowing glances with her siblings. "Does this mean we might all live together someday?" Thomas asked with characteristic directness. "We're taking things one day at a time," Cassandra answered, squeezing Jonathan's hand. "Like a scientific process," Jonathan added. "Observation before conclusion," Sophie nodded approvingly. "Logical, but also promising." As they stood together in the modest living room of the house Cassandra had made a home, Jonathan realized that the family before him was neither the one he had rejected years ago nor the one he might have envisioned had he made different choices. It was something altogether more complex and beautiful, a family shaped by absence and presence, by wounds and healing, by the unbreakable bonds of both biology and choice. In the end, his initial denial had cast a long shadow, but it was the light of acceptance that finally defined them, not as a perfect family, but as a real one, with all the complications and joys that entailed.